Good afternoon to you. Mark Sott of HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Outlook and discussion for the 14th of July, 2015. Happy Tuesday to you. Here's what's going on out in the tropics today. Tropical storm Claudette here up in the northwest Atlantic. Take a look at the tracking map for it over the next several days. Going to head up into Atlantic Canada here towards Newfoundland, where it will dissipate, become post-tropical in nature, and not pose any significant threat. Even from a rainfall perspective, it'll bring some rain, some gusty winds, but this is not a major impact event, which is obviously good news for the folks up in Canada. Now let's take a look at a different perspective here. This comes from the Storm Pulse maps that we have from Risk Pulse, the parent company, and they are amazing. I tell you what, very dynamic. I love using them. And this is off of our client services site. You can see Claudette here in the northwest Atlantic. And then off of the coast of Mexico, Hurricane Dolores and Tropical Storm Enrique. So we've already taken a look at Claudette. Let's take a look at Dolores now. This is the forecast track for the next several days. Clearly moving away from, even though paralleling for the most part the Mexican coastline, this will pull any moisture away from Mexico and reduce the impact to that area over the next couple of days or so. There has been a few squalls, some rougher than normal seas along the coastline, but this is not expected to do much more than what's already taken place along the Mexican coastline. So if we refresh the map, we go back out and we look at Enrique, it is fortunately over the open waters of the Pacific here. We'll take a look at its track over the next several days. Trying to make this go away, zoom in on it. And it's going to stay out over the open Pacific and eventually die out, not even posing even the remotest of threats to Hawaii. So that's about it in terms of development and existing storms in the Atlantic Basin and the Eastern Pacific. Now I wanted to go over something that's rather interesting, sort of the educational segment of today's video discussion. The tropical storm Claudette moved off of the coast of North Carolina here as a complex area of showers and thunderstorms and a disturbance in the atmosphere, and then it developed rather quickly over this very warm water. This is an anomaly map in degrees Celsius, departures from normal. That's what we call an anomaly. And you can see there's plenty of this orange and red here in the western Atlantic Basin. So we had this disturbance come through and moved off the coast and very quickly organized into a fairly small tropical cyclone, but a tropical cyclone nonetheless. It was caught in the flow and out it went, as we now know, headed towards Nova Scotia to the east of there and then eventually into Newfoundland. But the point is, you've got this very warm water compared to normal here in the western Atlantic. There's Bermuda, this would be the coast of North Carolina, here's Florida, and this is just waiting for something to come along. Probably later in the season, a tropical wave may be coming in from the southeast that gets into this sweet spot area and tries to develop, and it's going to be fairly close to home. And I'm bringing this up because it's important to realize what kind of a hurricane season we're having. And let me expand upon that thought by looking at the bigger picture. So this is a good deal of the Atlantic Basin. This is the Cape Verde Islands. Here are the Lesser Antilles, Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Bahamas, etc. All right, so this is a visible satellite shot, and I think you can plainly see we have this sort of curled up feature right here. This is a high amplitude tropical wave of low pressure in the atmosphere that rolled off Africa several days ago. And if this was a year that's not 2015, or really the last few, we might be somewhat interested in this as it moves on to the west with time. It has a lot of energy associated with it, a large envelope of energy to work with, but you can see that it is fairly void of any significant convection, maybe just a little bit right here, and that's reaching, believe me. Why is this the case? Well, we can look at a different perspective. This is from the Cooperative Institute for Meteorological Satellite Studies out of the University of Wisconsin, and this shows us the Saharan air layer as indicated by this orange color, orange and red and some yellows, and there's the tropical wave embedded firmly within this SAL, the SAL or Saharan air layer. And this is going to be probably the rule of the season. There is very strong high pressure present over the tropical Atlantic. There's another wave coming off, has a nice S shape to it, but it too will run headstrong into this very dry and stable air mass. And so you could just almost put a big fat X out here and say that we're not going to have much in the way of prolific development this season in this region, what we call the main development region, right through here, sort of Hurricane Alley. In a year such as 2004, where we had Ivan that came off and Francis, they all developed out here. 2008, Hurricane Ike had its genesis way out here in the tropical Atlantic, made it all the way over to Texas. We're probably not going to see that this year, and here's another reason why. Underneath all of that, this is these satellite pictures before are obviously looking at clouds and then different layers of the atmosphere. Now this is looking at the ocean, and you can see clearly here we have this blue area, and that represents a half a degree to a degree Celsius below the long-term average, right through the heart of the main development region. So it's no wonder when you see this, all this below normal water temperature going on, that you have a tropical wave sitting over that has no convection, because there's less energy available because the water is colder than it normally is. Now right off of Africa here, for a few hundred miles out to the west, water temperatures are quite a bit above the long-term average, but once you get over here, they are not. And a couple of things can be derived from that. First, you're not going to have, again, as I said, this prolific development where you have a tropical storm forming here and it tracks all the way across and hits the United States somewhere. Probably not going to have that this year, and if we do, it would probably be only one, because it's just that hostile out there. But the other thing to take away from this is you still have these tropical waves, and they're still there. Those haven't stopped. They're just not developing out here. So if they don't develop here, the Caribbean is also quite hostile. We have very strong upper level winds. They start to come west and they start turning around the periphery of the Bermuda High that sits out here. And so maybe, just maybe, they start trying to develop somewhere in this region. And that's something that we have to look for in a season like this, that we're not going to have 10 days to watch something that got its origin here, whereas it might get its origin up in here. You remember Hurricane Andrew in 1992, a marginal El Nino year, some would argue, but the Atlantic was very hostile that year. That cannot be argued. And Andrew didn't form way out here. It tried to start somewhere in here, and then it came across and, of course, left a devastating trail of destruction in extreme South Florida, but it began in this area, not way out here close to the coast of Africa. And so we just need to be watching for that as we get into August and September, especially. Just something to keep an eye on. What does the future hold? I like to look at the Madden-Julian oscillation, especially when there's pretty big disagreement among the major model suites. This is the GFS and its ensemble members here, indicating this is where the MJO is now, just coming into the Western Hemisphere. So we do have Dolores and Enrique in the Eastern Pacific, and then the MJO kind of goes sort of null for a while, meaning there's not much discernible MJO activity. But then the GFS suggesting a healthy amplification here into phases 1 and 2, which typically favors the Atlantic Basin, the Gulf of Mexico, areas that I just outlined near the United States. On the other hand, the Euro says, yeah, well, we're going to go into the null phase here and then just hang out barely with any amplification right at the edge of phase 2, but very, very, between 2 and 3, but very, very low amplitude. So what does this all mean? Maybe over the next 2 to 3 weeks we could see a couple of other development areas, depending on which of these models has a handle on the MJO the best, or maybe we have nothing really until August or September, when the natural climatological factors start to kick in of lower pressures in the tropics. The high pressure starts to loosen its grip a little bit. The Saharan air layer lets up a little bit more. In July, you typically don't see that much development. But anyway, watching for these two different signals here between the GFS and the Euro. Yeah, if you split the difference, maybe you get a little bit of an amplification here in phase 2. So over the next couple of weeks, it could be a little interesting to watch for developments, maybe in the northern Gulf of Mexico, more than likely off the southeast coast like we saw with Claudette, and probably going to be moving away from the United States with the upper flow. But you never know. That's what these discussions sort of help do, hopefully, and that is to enlighten you on what we look at and what the possibilities are. And then we explore them when they do pop up and see what may happen. All right? So there you go. Have a good rest of your Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow with another hurricane outlook and discussion. We'll see what's going on then. So for now, I am Mark Sudduth, and always, of course, for HurricaneTrack.com. Have a good afternoon, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow.